My daughter left me standing at curbside departures with 2 suitcases and told me to figure it out myself. Then she rolled up the window and drove into Phoenix traffic, and I stood there in 104-degree heat holding my son-in-law's blazer on a hanger because nobody had bothered to take it back inside. I want you to sit with that image because I did. I stood with it for almost 40 minutes before anything else happened. But that's not where this story ends. Not even close. My name is Walter Sorensen. Everyone who's known me more than 5 minutes calls me Walt. I'm 67 years old. I spent 34 years as a structural engineer at Bartlett & Cole in downtown Tulsa. The kind of job where your name ends up stamped on bridges and parking structures nobody thinks twice about until the day they don't fall down. I live alone now, in the brick ranch house on Marlowe Avenue where I raised my daughter. The same house my wife Margaret died in 3 years ago this past April. I used to believe that if you built something solid enough, it would hold. Beams, buildings, families. I was wrong about at least one of those. It took an airport curb in Arizona to teach me which one. Renee is my only child, 38 now, married 9 years to a man named Craig Blake, living in a gated subdivision outside Scottsdale. Craig runs Blake Horizon Development, boutique residential projects. The kind of business card that says a lot and tells you nothing. My granddaughter Bailey is 15, and she is, without question, the best thing that family produced. After Margaret passed, Renee called every Sunday for a year, then every other Sunday. Then it became a 9 o'clock text with a heart emoji, the kind of message people send when they don't want an actual conversation. So when she called me on a Tuesday and said, "Dad, come out for Labor Day, just us. Bailey's been asking about you," I nearly dropped the phone. I booked the flight that same night. Renee picked me up at baggage claim wearing sunglasses indoors, which should have told me something. Bailey wasn't with her. "She's got a thing," Renee said, which turned out to mean nothing at all, because Bailey had no thing and spent the whole weekend confused about why nobody brought her to the airport. The first 2 days were fine, if strange. Craig grilled steaks and talked for 40 minutes about a Cave Creek development he called the crown jewel of the portfolio, a phrase he used 3 separate times, like he was rehearsing it for someone who wasn't me. Sunday evening, Bailey showed me a robotics project on the back patio, a little wheeled machine navigating a maze on sensors she'd coded herself, explaining torque and gear ratios with a flashlight held between her teeth. Something loosened in my chest watching her. Remember that patio. It matters later. That night, after Bailey went to bed, Renee and Craig sat me down at the kitchen island with a manila folder and 2 glasses of wine I hadn't asked for. Craig did the talking. It's about estate planning, protecting the house, avoiding probate headaches. He slid the folder toward me like a quarterly report. Inside was a document titled, "Quitclaim Deed with Retained Life Estate." My Tulsa address typed across the top. 2 blank signature lines below mine, one for Renee, one for Craig. "This just adds us to the deed," Renee said, "too fast. The way people talk when they've rehearsed the next 4 sentences. Nothing changes for you. Everybody does this now, Dad." It's smart. I wasn't offended by estate planning. I'd already handled that with my own attorney, Warren Pike, 3 years earlier. What bothered me was the folder itself, the urgency, the blank lines, notarized and waiting. On the one weekend I happened to be 2,000 miles from my own lawyer. "I'd like Warren to look this over first," I said. The temperature in that kitchen dropped 15 degrees. Craig's jaw went tight. "We were hoping to get this squared away before you flew out. There's a title window issue, financing timing. It's complicated." I filed that phrase away without knowing yet how important it would become. I didn't sign. I went to the guest room and lay awake until nearly 2 in the morning, listening to a low argument 2 rooms away that I wasn't meant to hear. I couldn't make out words, just tone. And after 34 years reading blueprints for load-bearing weaknesses, tone is a thing I've gotten very good at detecting. Monday morning, Renee was cold in a way that wasn't rude, just efficient, like I'd become an item on a checklist. She told me my flight had been moved up 2 hours. It hadn't. It left exactly on schedule, as I'd learn later. But I didn't know that yet. I just knew we needed to leave by 11 instead of 1, and Bailey came downstairs in her school uniform saying, "Wait, Grandpa's leaving already? I thought we were doing the robotics thing again. Nobody answered her. The drive to Sky Harbor took 18 minutes in silence. At the departures curb, Renee popped the trunk without getting out. Okay, this is you. I pulled my suitcase out, reached for the garment bag mixed in with my things, held it up. This one's Craig's, isn't it? Window still down, sunglasses still on, engine still running. Figure it out, Dad. I've got a lot going on right now. And she pulled into traffic and was gone. I called. Straight to voicemail. I texted. Nothing. I sat down on a concrete bench in the shade, sweat soaking through my collar, and out of pure habit I thought about calling Margaret before I remembered I couldn't. That's when a voice said my name. Walt? Walt Sorensen? A man in his mid-40s, rolling a carry-on, sport coat that fit like it cost more than my first car. It's Marcus. Marcus Whitfield. You hired me in 1998. Drafting table 3, 3rd floor, Bartlett and Cole. Marcus Whitfield, 22 years old the last time I'd really known him. A kid with more talent than confidence. Sitting at the table nearest the window because I'd put him there so the light would be good and he'd have no excuse for sloppy line work. I'd spent 2 years teaching him load calculations and moment diagrams before he left for Phoenix in 2004. He looked at the suitcases, the garment bag that clearly wasn't mine, whatever was showing on my face. Walt, what's going on? I gave him the short version. He listened the way he used to listen at that drafting table, patient, absorbing, occasionally nodding. That's not okay, Walt, he said finally. I don't care what's going on with her. She's got a lot on her plate, I said. Because apparently after 67 years, I still don't know how to stop defending my own daughter. Marcus didn't argue out loud. He just looked at me, the way a man looks at someone he doesn't believe for a second. Come on. I've got 3 hours before my flight to Denver. There's a place past security, with real chairs and air conditioning. You're going to tell me what's actually going on. And then I'm going to tell you why I've been trying to track you down for 2 months. That stopped me cold. Over coffee near gate B14, Marcus told me he runs Whitfield Structural Group now. 91 employees, headquartered in Phoenix, satellite office in Denver, built from nothing since 2011. I built it on your training, he said. Every calculation method I teach my junior engineers, I learned from you. 2 months earlier, he'd been asked to speak at the National Structural Engineers Symposium in Chicago, that November, with a lifetime achievement recognition alongside it. And they'd asked him to name someone who shaped his career. He'd given them my name, and had a researcher hunting for my contact information ever since, because Bartlett and Cole had been absorbed into a regional firm years ago, and nobody had a forwarding address. I sat there with my coffee halfway to my mouth, not knowing what to say. I'm telling you, Margaret would have called that something, Marcus said quietly. He remembered her name, from a Christmas party 20 years ago. My throat went tight enough that I had to look down at the fries for a second. We talked for almost 2 hours. He told me about the symposium, about wanting me there as his guest of honor. He also mentioned, almost offhand, that he did occasional forensic consulting, expert witness work on structural failure and construction litigation, and asked what had brought me to Scottsdale in the first place. So I told him about the folder, the blank signature lines, the phrase, financing timing. Marcus went quiet in a way that made me nervous. Walt, Blake Horizon Development, is that the Cave Creek project? Sonoran Vista Ranch, 40-some lots, broke ground last spring? My stomach dropped. That's what Craig called it, the crown jewel. 2 of my former clients are investors in that project, he said. 3 weeks ago, I got asked to do an independent structural review out there because there's a lawsuit brewing. Investors claiming falsified soil compaction reports to hit deadlines. I turned it down. Conflict of interest. But Walt, that lawsuit is real, it's active, and it's asking for damages north of $4 million. I felt something shift under my feet, the way it does when you realize a beam you trusted has a hairline crack you never caught. $4 million. A quitclaim deed sitting ready with blank lines, produced on the exact weekend I was visiting. A flight suddenly needing to move up 2 hours for no real reason at all. I flew home that afternoon with Marcus's card in my pocket and a knot in my stomach that didn't loosen the whole flight. I hung Craig's blazer in my hall closet and looked at it a long moment before calling my oldest friend, Hank Doyle, retired general contractor, 2 streets over, married 41 years to a woman named Carol, whose pecan pie should honestly be illegal. Hank tells you the truth even when you'd rather he didn't. Walt, he said, once I'd told him everything. You know what that document does if you sign it? Really know? Tell me anyway. It puts Craig's name on your house. Joint tenancy, which means if that lawsuit goes the way it sounds like it's going, and a judgment lands on him personally, his creditors can come after any asset with his name attached, including a house in Tulsa he's never paid a dime of property tax on. They'd have been using my house as a shield, I said. Or collateral, or both. He needs equity to cover legal exposure before that lawsuit locks his own assets down. And your daughter helped put that folder in front of you. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I drove to Warren Pike's office on Riverside Drive with the folder in my carry-on. He read it twice, took his glasses off, and looked at me the way a man looks at you when he'd rather not say what comes next. Walt, this isn't simple estate planning. This converts sole ownership into joint tenancy, effective immediately, not after you pass. Your life estate lets you keep living there, but it does not protect the property from claims against either of their names. If Craig gets a judgment, a creditor can absolutely place a lien against his ownership interest in this house. In 15 years, I don't see documents like this show up by accident. Somebody who knew exactly what they were doing drafted this to look simple. I sat in that conference room a long time, watching the river move slow and brown past the window, thinking about how many times Margaret used to say, "Renee has good instincts, Walt. Let her be." Wondering when those instincts had gotten overwritten by somebody else's. I let 3 full days pass without calling her. Silence isn't nothing. Silence is a decision. I spent those days instead with Warren, with Hank, and with an accountant named Priya Nair, going through exactly what my financial footprint looked like inside Renee and Craig's life. It turned out there was more than the deed. 3 years of Bailey's private school tuition, wired directly and gladly, that one I never regretted. A co-signature on Renee and Craig's Range Rover loan. My name and social security number backing a car I'd never once ridden in. A detail I'd genuinely forgotten until Priya pulled the credit report. And buried in the statements, a recurring $600 monthly transfer I'd started after Margaret died, when Renee cried on the phone about how tight things were, quietly continuing every month since, on autopilot, the way grief makes you generous without asking many questions. Nearly $9,000 a year, on top of tuition, on top of a car loan, and the thank you for 30 years of being their financial floor was a curb, 2 suitcases, and 4 words through a rolled-down window. I called Marcus on the 4th day, about the symposium first, told him yes, I'd be honored, and mentioned, almost in passing, what Warren and Priya had found. He went quiet again. I know a couple of the litigation attorneys representing the investors. Purely as a friend, I could make an introduction, so you understand what Craig's actually carrying before you decide anything about that house. I said yes. 10 days later, a careful, lawyerly phone call confirmed it was worse than I expected. Blake Horizon had allegedly submitted falsified soil compaction reports to move Sonoran Vista Ranch through permitting faster than the site conditions allowed, cutting close to $600,000 in required remediation. Cracks had already appeared in 2 completed foundations. Craig wasn't just facing a civil judgment, he was facing a county review that could turn into a criminal referral if intentional falsification was proven. He'd needed my house, or my credit, or both, in the next several weeks to keep the whole thing propped up, long enough to settle quietly or ride out the storm. I sat with that 2 more days. Then I called Renee. She answered on the 2nd ring, that same brittle brightness in her voice. "Dad, hey, I've been meaning to call. I need you to listen," I said. Level, the way I used to explain a cost overrun to a client in a boardroom. I had Warren review the deed. I know what it actually does. I know it puts Craig's name on my house, not just yours. I know about the Cave Creek lawsuit. I know about the soil compaction allegations. And I know that document was drafted to move fast enough to be recorded before that lawsuit ever touched anything else he owns. The silence went on long enough that I checked whether the call had dropped. Dad, it's not what you think. I'm not finished. I flew 2,000 miles to see you and Bailey. I was dropped at curbside departures 4.5 hours early with your husband's blazer and told to figure it out. That's the part I want you to sit with, Renee, not the deed, the curb. Her breathing changed. I love you, I said. And I meant every word of it, the way I'd meant it since she was 4 years old, asleep against my shoulder in a rocking chair. Margaret and I bought second-hand from a church sale. I have never once stopped loving you. But love isn't the same thing as being useful. And somewhere in the last few years, I think that's the only thing I've been to you and Craig, useful. That's not fair, she said, cracking now. Then tell me it's not true. Tell me the tuition and the car loan and the $600 a month since your mother died, and a deed timed to a lawsuit you didn't think I'd find. Tell me none of that adds up to something. I'll believe you if you can say it and mean it. She didn't say it. She just cried, quietly, 2,000 miles away. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I let the silence sit there instead of rushing to fill it for her. Here's what happens now, I said. I'm not signing that deed. I'm not ever going to be the safety net for Craig's business again. The monthly transfer stops this week. I'm coming off the Range Rover loan. You'll need to refinance in his name alone or sell it. Bailey's tuition stays exactly as it is. That was never for you and Craig. That was for her. You're punishing us, Renee said, her voice sliding from tears into something harder, closer to the woman who'd rolled up the window. No, I'm stopping. There's a difference. I spent 3 days waiting for you to explain yourself before you knew I already had the answers. That told me everything about what this weekend really was. I hung up and sat on my back porch a long time in the dark, listening to cicadas along Marlowe Avenue. What I felt wasn't triumph. It was a strange, quiet clarity, the kind you feel when a structural report finally confirms what you already suspected, and you can stop pretending the crack in the foundation is just cosmetic. 2 weeks later, Warren drew up an amended will. The house, along with the bulk of my retirement accounts, went into an irrevocable trust with one named beneficiary, Bailey, administered until she turns 25, her education fully funded, regardless of anything happening in her parents' lives. Renee is still named, a modest sum, a gesture rather than an inheritance, because I couldn't bring myself to cut my own daughter out entirely. Craig's name appears nowhere in it. I called Bailey directly, something I'd never done before because it always felt like going around her parents. I told her I wanted to keep doing the robotics thing whenever she wanted. Calls, visits, whatever worked. And that nothing that happened between me and her mom and dad changed one thing about how I felt about her. She was quiet a second, then, Grandpa, Mom's been weird for like a month. I didn't know why. I'm glad you're not mad at me. I told her I could never in 100 years be mad at her. I meant every syllable. That's the part of this story that actually matters more than the lawsuit or the deed. Bailey calls me every Sunday now. Not because anyone tells her to, but because she wants to talk through physics homework or a new coding project. She's the loyal one in that family. She always was. I just hadn't been paying close enough attention to see it clearly until a curb in Phoenix forced me to. November came, and I flew back on my own terms, staying at a hotel near the convention center instead of a guest room I no longer trusted. The symposium filled a ballroom with 600 engineers from every corner of the country. On the second evening, Marcus Whitfield stood at the podium and told them about a drafting table by a window in Tulsa in 1998, about a boss who never let sloppy work slide, about everything he'd built, tracing back to 2 years of patient instruction from a man he was proud to call his mentor. Then he called my name. I walked up onto that stage in front of 600 strangers, and Marcus, 44 years old, founder of a firm with 91 employees, shook my hand like I was the most important person in the room. Afterward, over dinner, he offered me a standing role as senior consultant on the firm's most complex projects. Part-time, my own schedule, most months from Tulsa. I need your eye on things, Walt, he said, almost stern about it, the way I used to be stern with him. Nobody in this firm catches a hairline problem in a load path the way you used to catch them. I said yes before he'd finished the sentence. I still hear from Renee occasionally. A Christmas card, a birthday call this spring, that lasted 11 minutes and felt more honest than anything she'd said in the 2 years before it. Craig's lawsuit settled out of court in January for an amount I'm told nearly wiped out the company. Blake Horizon Development quietly dissolved by March. I don't know the details of how they're managing now, and I've made my peace with not knowing, because that's not my house to keep propping up anymore. I built enough structures in my career that stood on their own to understand the difference between a foundation and a favor. Hank still comes over most Friday nights with 2 beers and Carol's pecan pie, and we sit on that same back porch talking about nothing important, which after everything has come to feel like the most important thing there is. Marcus and I talk most weeks about steel connections and seismic retrofits, and sometimes about nothing work-related at all. And every Sunday evening at 7, my phone rings, and it's Bailey, somewhere between a math problem and a story about her robotics team. I sit in my kitchen on Marlowe Avenue and listen to every word of it. It took 67 years and one very hot curb in Phoenix to teach me something. Love that only shows up when it needs something from you was never love in the first place. It was a transaction wearing love's clothing, and I wore those clothes a long time without noticing the fit was wrong. But the people who show up for no reason at all, who explain gear ratios by flashlight, who call because they want to, not because they need something signed, those are the ones you build your foundation around. Those are the ones worth every beam. I think about that afternoon at Sky Harbor sometimes, standing there holding a stranger's blazer, sweating through my shirt, genuinely believing for 40 minutes that I'd been left with nothing at all. I hadn't been left with nothing. I'd been left standing exactly where I needed to be, at exactly the right moment, for someone who actually remembered my name to walk straight toward me and remind me what it felt like to matter to somebody for the right reasons. Sometimes the worst moment of your life is just the universe clearing a curb so somebody better can pull up to it.